Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Prospecting and Business Development with Schneider Training. This event is brought to you by the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition and Schneider Training Solutions. First, I want to make sure that everybody can hear us okay and see the screen. If you can just type yes in the question tab, I'd greatly appreciate it, and then we know that everybody can hear us and on the line. Perfect. Thank you so much. Please feel free to use this same question tab at any time during the broadcast. Just type your question in this dashboard field and we will read it to our presenter. See the handout tab for downloads from today's program as well. There's some forms that Jeff will be referencing, as well as a list of upcoming PNDC events. I would like to introduce our speaker here today, Jeff Schneider with Schneider Training Solutions. Jeff founded Schneider Training Solutions after a long and successful career in sales and sales management in the media industry. Jeff brings his own selling and management experience along with the impactful work of Sandler Training into every new client engagement in order to help them solve the selling challenges they face. We also are delighted to have PNDC's Board Vice Chair, Jay Schmidt, Executive VP and General Manager with Silicon Forest Electronics, joining us here today to moderate the discussion. Jeff and Jay, I will turn things over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kay. Thank you. Well, Jeff, thank you for coming to
My
Silicon
pleasure.
Forest. And
good to be back.
Yeah. I'm familiar with Sandler Training for about the last 10 years that we've used here at Silicon Forest. But for the audience out there, what is Sandler? What do you do? And why do you think it's a great method for selling?
So Sandler is a selling methodology founded by our founder, David Sandler. And I never had the pleasure of meeting David Sandler, but I feel like I know him. He passed away about 25 years ago, and I've been doing this for 12 years now. And he decided he wanted to create kind of an anti-selling system, really. Well, one of the things that he said was, whatever your competition is doing, stop doing that. He said you ought to try and be 180 degrees different than traditional selling methodologies. Simply because when we think about salespeople and selling, we all have negative connotations, right? You've had bad experiences with salespeople. Hopefully, I wasn't one of them.
Not at all.
Right? But we've all had situations at the car dealership, or somebody who's trying to sell us something that we don't really feel like we have a need for, and it leaves a bad taste in our mouth. And David Sandler knew that, so he created a system which I like to refer to as a trusted advisor methodology. Because what we're really trying to do as salespeople, in my opinion, is see if there's a good fit, right? We want to ask questions. We want to be slow to pitch, slow to present, slow to talk about what it's going to cost, things like that, and really stay in this questioning process to see what the situation is that the prospect is facing a lot longer than perhaps our natural inclination is. So what I do is sales training, sales management training and coaching and consulting, customer service training. I've got a training center in downtown Portland, and I train people all over the Portland metro area, really all over the United States, if it makes sense, on this thing that we call the Sandler methodology.
Great, thanks. So, the terms marketing and sales are sometimes used interchangeably, but they are related and often confused for one another. In your mind, what's the difference between marketing and sales, and how should they ideally work together?
Yeah. So marketing and sales really are different, and they're related. I like to think of it as like a river in a sense. If you can picture, upstream versus downstream, upstream is the marketing component. I was a marketing major at San Diego State. I probably would have been a sales major, but they didn't offer that, so I was a marketing major. It was the least amount of math in the business. And so as a marketing major, the marketing people, if they're doing their job right, what they should be doing before they come up with slick brochures and websites and lead gen campaigns is going to the market and asking the market, what is it that you want, right? That's the whole marketing idea. Now, a lot of companies are engineering focused, meaning they come up with a great product and they say, this is going to change the world. And they go to the salespeople and they say, here, sell this. right? That's not the right approach, even although there's a lot of great products and ideas that started that way. Really, the right approach is to go to the market to try and uncover a need or an unprotected niche, and then to come back to the company and say, let's develop a product that the market is saying there's a demand for, there's an unprotected niche, and let's find a way to be able to meet that need, right? Then the job for the salespeople is easier. So marketing's job then, once they've come up with this product and developed a way to be able to serve the needs of people, is to generate leads. Primarily, and certainly that's one of the primary functions of a website. Sales then takes those leads and sees if they're actually qualified to go through the entire selling process. There's a mixture in the middle, right? There's a point in the river where this is all getting blurred these days, in which salespeople increasingly are engaging in things that traditionally were marketing's realm, right? So the whole area of social media, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'm doing videos and blogs and papers. Those were traditionally marketing areas of expertise, right? And marketing is pushing farther into the sales realm as well. And I think part of this is because the way that people buy has fundamentally changed. I mean, 10, 15, 20 years ago, a buyer really relied upon their salespeople, their vendors, to educate them about what was new in the marketplace and what the leading trends were in terms of technology. And also, here's what's coming in the future and you need to be aware of it. For the most part, buyers don't need us for that anymore, right? And so they can find the information that they need. I mean, my kids, they just pick up the phone and they ask Siri, and Siri tells them what to do. And whenever we find a situation in which, they need to solve a problem, they go out to YouTube and they find a video for it. So much of the information that people need, they're no longer dependent upon salespeople for that information. They can find it for themselves. So marketing then has to create information so that when a person goes looking for it, they can find the information that they need. I was in a Vistage Summit just yesterday, and I sat in on a session called 8 Trends in Digital Marketing. And one of the things that they said, which really was eye-opening for me, was that within the next couple of years, well over 50% of searches will be auditory. It will be Siri, right, or Alexa, as opposed to the searches that we're doing now. And so we have to start thinking, I know this is the marketing part of it, a little bit more upstream, but we have to stop thinking in terms of typing a formal search and instead thinking of the way people talk to Siri or Alexa in order to figure out where we need to be and what search words we need to use. So this whole thing is a river, and the downstream part, the subset, is the selling part. Right. Well, once we've identified somebody that matches what we call our ideal client profile, then we can start qualifying to see if, in fact, there is a good fit.
Great. Well, I know that, as you just mentioned, the ideal customer profile is one of the things that you emphasize in your training. I mean, some companies would say, well, any customer is a good customer as long as they're sending checks. Mm-hmm. But in your mind, what is an ideal customer profile, or ICP? And why is that so vitally important?
So an ICP, which does not stand for Insane Clown Posse, by the way, an ICP, an ideal customer profile, is really just a bullseye. It's a description of the types of clients that we want to do business with. Again, I was a marketing major. This is one of the things that stuck. And so an ICP is simply a description of the types of clients that if I could clone, right, if I could replicate them, I'd want to do business with these people over and over and over again. And as you mentioned, Jay, it's very common for somebody who's new as a sales rep or somebody who's got a fairly young company to do business with anybody who can fog a mirror, anybody who can write them a check. In fact, their definition of their ICP would be anybody who can write me a check. I don't know if you've had this experience. I certainly have. First couple years in the business, I took the business, I took the money, and I regretted it. Right? We've all done it. And we kind of sensed in our heart of hearts that something was wrong here. Either they were too eager or too fast, or they weren't qualifying us from the buying side the way that they should have. They had heard something good about us, and they were simply looking for a quick fix, and we were willing to take the money. Right? And so my goal personally, I hope this is a goal of all the people who are listening here today, is not just to make money, not just to close as many sales as I possibly can, but to have a client base with 100% raving fans. Because ultimately the best way for all of us to grow our businesses is via referral. And so the way that we do that is we under-promise, we over-deliver, we place a strong emphasis on customer service and results, and we understand that we're not everything to everybody. Right? This is one of the hard things I find with certain salespeople and business owners is that they're very passionate and they really believe everybody should do business with me. We are the greatest thing that's ever been invented. And a dose of reality is necessary to say, yes, you're great. Yes, you're best in class. But there are reasons why people will choose to do business with your competitors as opposed to you. And those reasons are sometimes valid. There's reasons why people will do it themselves as opposed to working with you. And it just simply means that they aren't ready right now. So I always want to, from my own standpoint as well as my clients, have rock solid confidence in my ability personally. But the part that I'm skeptical about is the fit, right? And so therefore, creating an ideal client profile is really, what is the center of that bullseye, right? When I first started my company 12 years ago, I did some quick math and I figured that there was 50 to 90,000 companies and salespeople and sales managers in the Vancouver, Salem, Portland metro area that I could do business with. And after the course of a year or two, I narrowed that down to about 500 people. That's the center of this bullseye here. 500 people that I really want to be speaking with on a regular basis. It's an arbitrary number, but it just helped me to just have a laser focus on what I was trying to accomplish and who I needed to speak with. And that's on the next slide. My own ideal customer profile. And so when you look at this ideal customer profile for myself, for Schneider Training Solutions, you'll see I've actually selected 3 different types of ideal customers. And one of them is, an individual salesperson. Second one is a small business owner, $1 to $20 million company. Third one is a larger organization. But what I was trying to do here was to create a description of the types of people that I really want to speak with. And if you look at that ideal client number 2, ideal customer number 2, that's the 500, right? And so anytime I go to a trade show, a networking event, and anytime that I have a lead come in from my website, the question I'm asking myself is, to what extent does this person or this company resemble my ICP? Because when I get in front of my ICP and they are able to articulate their pain as well as the goals that they have for their organization, it becomes a no-brainer that we ought to consider working together. I had a conversation just a week or 2 ago with somebody who clearly didn't match my ICP, and about halfway in, I started explaining to them that I think you're 2 or 3 concentric circles away from my sweet spot. I use that language, and I explained to them why I thought it might not be a good fit. And they understood, and for a while, the ironic thing is they try and talk themselves into it, right? And this is where I have to have the integrity to say, I'd love to help you, but I think it's going to be a little bit more limited. I think there's a couple of areas where I can be of help to you, but probably some other areas where I can't. And if I can make a recommendation to somebody like that, to a different way to approach solving their pain, I'm always happy to do it. The funny thing is, Jay, I know you've experienced this. When you disqualify a prospect, somebody who really wants to work with you, how do they respond? They love it.
Right.
They thank you for it. I mean, we tend to think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to tick them off if I tell them I can't work with them. I mean, I've gotten hugs, I've gotten thank you notes, people who have given me referrals and vowed that when they were ready, they were going to come back and work with me.
Yeah. I know that in our experience here, after learning about the ideal customer profiles, we continually challenge ourselves on what is the center of that bullseye, because as we know, some salespeople will fall in love with a new prospect, and they may be out on the outer rung of the ideal customer profile, and it opens up the candor and the discussion that we have internally as an organization, and we find ourselves always having that discussion, because and then if we want to go change what's ideal, well, we do that consciously, but not deviating from the target. That's right.
And Kate, I may have got you out of order on the slides. Can you go back to creating your own ideal customer profile now? Thank you. So, Jade, it brings up an important point, which is for larger organizations in which they have more than one salesperson, 2, 3, 4, 5 salespeople or more. I think the company has to have an ICP. Something that the CEO and the marketing director and VP of sales have agreed upon over time. That's the starting point. But then I think individual salespeople need to have their own ICP, which is reflective of the company's ICP, but perhaps slightly different. And it can be different based upon geographic territories. It can be different based upon verticals. It can be different based upon, are they inside or outside? Are they dealing with major accounts, selling enterprise, pieces of software as opposed to simpler, straightforward products for a variety of reasons. Even the backgrounds and preferences that people have may steer them towards nonprofits a little bit more than somebody else who's never had nonprofit experience. So as we look at this slide here, creating your own ideal customer profile. This is an exercise I like to take my clients through. And I like to have them answer the question, if they've been in business for a while, who are the 5 best accounts you ever had? By the way, you guys are on this list.
Thank you.
First time I did this, literally about 9-10 years ago, you were one of the first accounts. Silicon Force was one of my first accounts when I started my company 12 years ago. And so write down the 5 accounts that were your best ever. Maybe not the biggest, probably profitable, but maybe not the most profitable ever. But if you could clone these companies, which ones would you write down, right? And then once you write those down, start asking yourself some questions. For instance, what do they have in common? And there are some obvious things that we would look at, like industry sector or product type or revenue size, things like that. But there may be some less obvious things that start to occur to you. So when I first did this exercise, all 5 of the companies that I wrote down were not in Multnomah County. That's the county Portland's in. That's where my training center is. They were in Clark County here in Washington, Vancouver. They were in Clackamas County, and they were in Washington County. And I thought, it's kind of interesting. So I started doing some more analysis, and I said, why is that? And you have to kind of say to yourself, is this a problem that I need to fix? Or is this just an indicator of who I'm appealing to? And I finally came to the conclusion. At first I thought maybe I need to grow a beard and get tattoos and stuff like that to be hipper. But I finally just decided, no, I think I just kind of appeal to suburban types of companies more than hip. Since then I've done lots of business in Multnomah County, but it was an insight. That's all it is. What do these companies have in common? And then we can start to, once we get the demographics down, take a look at the psychographics as well. What are the characteristics of your primary contact person? How did you bond with these people? What were some of their preferences? Because I think all of this thing goes into the development of this ideal customer profile.
Right.
So Kate, if you take a look again at my ideal customer profile, this document was originally an internal document that I created to help me make decisions about where to spend my marketing dollars and effort, as well as where to prospect. But over the years, it's become so critical for me when I make decisions like, should I join Rotary? Should I join the PNBC? Should I join, some other organizations? Where should I go networking? What trade shows should I go to? Because it always comes back to, what is my ICP? When I show up at a networking function, what I'm looking for is people who are in my ICP or people who know people within my ICP. The other benefit that this document has given me is that I get a lot of referrals. My business is primarily from referrals, hopefully because I do a good job. But I love to show this document to people. It's a little bit sneaky on my part, but when they see this document, I get referrals because I have articulated on one page what I'm looking for. And there's so many people that I could say, hey, anybody needs sales training? And the response is, not off the top of my head, but I'll let you know if somebody comes to mind. But once they see this document, they go, oh, I know who you need to be speaking to.
Got it. Great. So you've got your ICP down. You've identified your ideal customer or client profile. And now it's time to make some calls. So do we just go, get on the phone or get out there and just start talking to people, or should we develop a plan?
Yeah, we need to develop a plan. I mean, it's okay to pick up the phone and start making dials or walking into businesses, but I think we're missing a key component here, and this is called a prospecting plan. So David Sandler talked about a cookbook, and it's kind of a funny analogy, but he was kind of a funny, odd guy. And so he said every salesperson needs to have a cookbook, and he called it a cookbook because a cookbook is filled with what? Recipes, right? And when you think about a recipe, recipes have ingredients, they have amounts, they have time, they have order of operations, so you beat the eggs before you add the flour. And so in the same way, a cookbook or a prospecting plan, it's sort of like a business plan for a salesperson. Right? I mean, if you're going to run a successful business, you don't do it without some kind of a business plan. It doesn't have to be an elaborate 25-page document. I mean, I fully believe that there have been a lot of successful ventures started with a plan that was scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin after 3 martinis, right? It isn't the plan that you put in a frame and say, this is what we've done. It's a starting point that gets you moving. It's a hypothesis that says, I think if we did these things, we might end up here someday, right? And so in the same way that a business plan is necessary for business success, a prospecting plan is necessary for sales success. Right. And so a prospecting plan basically has the activities that a seller is going to engage in on a regular basis, how many of them they plan on doing, and then there's an element of accountability there. So for instance, prospecting activities could include cold phone calls, right? That's what most people think of when they think of prospecting. It could include walk-ins if you're in geographic proximity to your ideal customers. It can include emails. It can include LinkedIn, and I have a lot to say on the topic of LinkedIn. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But these days, I think for a lot of salespeople, LinkedIn is their primary prospecting platform from which they're doing a whole bunch of things, and other social media as well. It can include trade shows and conferences and webinars and luncheon learns and asking for referrals and establishing strategic alliances. So all of these are examples of prospecting activities. Does that mean every salesperson needs to do all of those? No. There's only one that I say every salesperson needs to engage in, and that's referrals. Right? We all should be aspiring to grow our business via referrals, and I have a lot to say on that topic as well, so feel free to ask me a question on that one. But what we really need is at least 5 activities in order to succeed. And so I have a little sophomoric rhyme, strive for 5 in order to thrive. Right? So the idea is that if you can come up with at least 5 different activities, reduce it down to paper, and put in this document how many cold calls, how many referrals you're going to ask for, how many LinkedIn invitations you're going to send, how many strategic alliance meetings, how many network events, right, in a given week. And if you can become accountable with at least one other human being on a regular basis, you've got a hypothesis. And now what we get to do is track how the activity is going and see if this hypothesis is accurate or not.
Yeah. That which gets measured gets improved.
That's right. Right. And done.
Yeah.
So I have an accountability set up with 2 other Sandler trainers, one in Sacramento, the other in Atlanta. We speak for 15 minutes every Monday morning at 7 a.m. So at some point Sunday, usually Sunday afternoon for me and Al, and usually about midnight for Dale, we're sending each other a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is our cookbook. It is what we did last week. It is a comparison between what we said we'd do and what we actually did. And we all say to each other, we've been doing this for years, that Thursday and Friday of each week, we're behind on activity, and we say, I'm going to be embarrassed if I have to send this to Al and Dale the way it is. I better make some calls. It just kicks us in the rear and gets us moving to do the activity that we said we need to do.
Great. So let's take a moment to ask the audience if you have any questions for Jeff, and Kate will moderate those for us as you enter those in.
Wonderful. Yes, as a reminder, just type your question in the question tab, and we'll definitely get to address that to Jeff. Also, don't forget, under the handout tab are some of the documents that Jeff has been referencing that you can download and make use of. Thank you very much, Jeff. Those are real valuable documents for everybody to have. Audience questions here. One on social media. Social media has changed so much in society. How has social media impacted the seller and the buyer and that relationship?
That's a great question. So social media is a game changer. We all spend an inordinate amount of time on social media, Facebook, Instagram. My kids just blow me away. I mean, my daughter can sit there all day long on her phone. Back when Vines was big, she'd say, check this out, this is so funny. I'd say, nothing's funny in 6 seconds. But she thought it was so hilarious. So it really does change our attention spans. It changes the way that we interact with each other. LinkedIn is the big social media for salespeople selling B2B products. So I want to focus on that one. I don't think Facebook is a tremendous selling tool unless you're selling a B2C product, except for this. I will say this about Facebook. One of the things that I have done is when I get to know a client fairly well, I'll send them a Facebook invitation. So you and I are connected on Facebook. And Jay, I'd love to meet you more often to have a beer, take you out to lunch, go to a Blazer game, things like that, but we're both busy. We've got family obligations. So a lot of us salespeople feel guilty because we aren't whining and dining and schmoozing and just building those relationships the way that we'd like to. Facebook actually takes a big part of that burden and allows us to build relationships behind the scenes. So I will do this on about a monthly basis. I'll go through and look at my client list, and I'll say, who do I need to add to Facebook? And so what happens is the next time I speak with them, they say, how's your son doing? And I saw that you were skiing up at Bachelor over Christmas. Did you have good weather? And so it's like we're connected even when we're not connected. So I think that's the role of Facebook, is it does help us to maintain relationships even when we're not spending time doing it. I found that to be a real bonus. LinkedIn is the real game changer, though. I was training a law firm about 6 years ago, and I was training them on prospecting plans and cookbooks. And the topic of cold calls came up, and I said, probably you guys aren't going to do cold calls. And one of the partners said, I do. And so we started explaining how he does cold calls and why. And his managing partner said, I don't want you doing that. And we all kind of looked at the managing partner and said, why? And he said, because if I get a cold call from a copier rep, I'm going to say no thanks, even if I need copiers, even if they're selling the copiers that I want, and even if they do a good job. I'm going to hang up the phone, go onto LinkedIn, and ask the people that I know and trust who they use for copiers, and I'm going to call those people. And I said, guys, this is why LinkedIn is a game changer. LinkedIn is making every other form of prospecting more difficult, especially cold calls. Because LinkedIn, a lot of people think LinkedIn is where you put your resume and you find a job. Yeah, that's one of its functions. But really, when you understand LinkedIn, it's the world's biggest referral network. When you send me a LinkedIn invitation, and by the way, please do. I will accept your LinkedIn invitation. Send me a LinkedIn invitation. When you send me a LinkedIn invitation, what I'm saying is that we're now going to get to know each other. And if there's anybody I can introduce you to, have at it. I'll do my best to introduce you to anybody in my over 4,000 connections that I have on LinkedIn. And so LinkedIn, it's funny, I still have this old school sales mentality that I have to make cold calls. I have to make cold calls. But I'm starting to train myself that before I pick up that phone, I stop. I go out to their LinkedIn profile. I read a little bit about them and their background and their who they are. Then I take a look at the connections that we have in common. And these days, going back to my ICP, if I'm calling somebody in my ideal client profile, let's say it's a creative shop or a technology company and it's the VP of sales in Portland, there is a better than 90% chance that we have at least 10, perhaps 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 connections in common. And I can scroll through and see, Jay Schmidt, you know this guy? Really? Why would I make a cold call when I can call you and say, do you know this person pretty well? Do you think I should be speaking with them? Can you give me some reconnaissance? Do you think there might be a good fit? Do you mind calling him first? So LinkedIn is a complete game changer. And therefore, and I do a 4-hour seminar on LinkedIn, so I have a lot that I could say about it. But some simple best practices for salespeople. Work on your profile. Make sure that your profile is professional. LinkedIn will guide you through it. They'll let you know when you're 75% complete, 90% complete, all-star level, whatever. Have a nice professional photo. When you write your bio, don't write it as a resume. Write it in terms of the value that you provide for your clients and your services, but also a description of your ideal client. That ought to be in your LinkedIn profile. Keep it short, but open it up at 8 a.m. in the morning. Keep it open until 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and whenever you have a meaningful conversation with somebody else, or wherever you have an email exchange back and forth that is at least neutral or somewhat positive, send them a LinkedIn invitation, right? So we're constantly, every single day, every single week, building up our LinkedIn. Every one of your clients should be a connection of yours on LinkedIn. And I post on a regular basis on LinkedIn 25 times a week. I'm doing video and articles and news of upcoming seminars. I'm checking to see who's looking at my profile. It's another very simple thing to do. When somebody's looking at my profile, they're kind of raising their hand, right? Either they're trying to sell me something, or they're somewhat interested in what it is that I'm selling. Either way, we should connect and have some sort of a conversation. There's a lot more I could say about LinkedIn, but Jay, your thoughts on it?
We use LinkedIn for that very reason. And again, the world is flat, and the 6 degrees, my joke, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is very strong.
Yeah.
And in LinkedIn,
1.8 now.
1.8.
Right?
Yeah.
LinkedIn has shrunk that dramatically.
Yeah. Kate, do we have any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have one more question here. Just in reference to longer selling cycles, anything that you can suggest that might help shorten this cycle?
Mm-hmm. So longer selling cycles are difficult, and in many ways are becoming much longer these days. The Sandler system is really designed to be able to help us shrink selling cycles. In fact, could you go back to the submarine slide?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let me explain this Sandler submarine in a little bit more depth, because I kind of skipped through it fairly quickly.
No pun intended.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So this submarine is called a submarine because it has compartments. In fact, David Sandler was watching a movie many years ago, and it was a movie called Run Silent, Run Deep, in which a submarine was sinking, but it was rescued at the very end, but they had to watch a poor sailor drowned as one of the compartments is sealed off, and David Sandler, being the odd duck that he is, kind of laughed, and he said, "That's my selling system right there." What he loved about it was the compartments, the idea that it's a sequential process that we're following on a regular basis, right? We know the elements of the compartments, bonding and rapport, upfront contracts, which is permission to ask questions, and we're specifically asking questions about the prospect's pain, their budget, and their decision-making process before we ever go to fulfillment. Fulfillment was poorly named, really, because it doesn't mean we're working together. Fulfillment means, okay, I'll present. Okay, I'll give you a quote. Okay, I'll give you a demo, right? Whatever it is that the prospect wants. So we hold on to that information longer because here's what David Sandler said. He said, not every prospect that asks you for a quote is worthy of a quote. You get to decide who gets the quote. In your world, Jay, do you crank out quotes in 5, 10, 15 minutes?
Never.
We're talking hours, maybe days, right?
Yeah.
So when Jay and I were working together, one of the things that we put in place was a go, no-go. And this go, no-go was a decision on the part of Silicon Forest about whether or not they would bid the work, right? Mm-hmm. And so it allowed Silicon Forest to get into the driver's seat as the trusted advisor and to say, we're going to ask you some questions to see if it makes sense for us to do a quote for you or not. Quotes cost real dollars. We're going to get a bunch of people involved in our company and your company, and we just want to make sure that we're serious before we go to this next step. So the way that we shrink selling cycles in Sandler is by taking control of this conversation as a trusted advisor by setting what we call upfront contracts. And upfront contracts, as I mentioned, are a mutual agreement between two people about what's going to take place in this conversation. So an upfront contract, it's more than an agenda. I mean, I'm certainly saying, hey, Jay, my goal is to see if there's a good fit here between what I do, sales training and coaching, and what your company may or may not have a need for. I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to tell him the types of questions I might want to ask him. Figure out what kinds of questions he wants to ask me. We're going to get into agreement on how much time we've allocated for this meeting. But the most important part is the possible outcomes at the end. And the possible outcomes is where I suggest to him that we might say no and we might say yes, but what we're not going to do is think it over. David Sandler understood that yes is my favorite word, right, as a salesperson. No is my second favorite word as a salesperson. Now, that's not natural, okay? We hate the word no, but what's good about no?
At least you have an outcome.
Right? It's a closed loop. You know where you're at and you can move on. So if we can just get to yeses and no's, and nothing in between, we're going to shrink selling cycles. Not down to days and weeks when it's been 24 months, but we might cut them in half.
Yeah.
It's quite conceivable that we can cut selling cycles in half when we're starting and ending every conversation with what we call an upfront contract. These are highly assertive, non-aggressive techniques that actually make the other party comfortable because they realize that, okay, we aren't talking about signing a check today. What we're talking about is the next logical decision in my buying process. And we just tee that up at the start. Are you comfortable, if we feel like there's a good fit, Jay, setting up another meeting where we bring in the other people that are going to be a part of this process and really talk about what issues we're trying to fix and then decide if I come back with the scope of work.
One of the things that we've learned from the Sandler training, as Jeff mentioned, is this idea of the upfront contract. And I know that in our experience that even trying to establish an upfront contract helps us to qualify or disqualify potential new customers, because once we ask a potential new customer, is it okay if I ask you a few questions about this request that you've given us, and the first thing they say is, well, why are you asking me so many questions? It typically disqualifies them, because now we know that this is, if they're not going to, be open with us, it's probably not going to be a fit.
That's right. So an upfront contract, when it's done properly, on the salesperson side, we're correctly guessing at what the next logical step is to take. So if I'm talking to you, and you're somebody that approached me in the first place, and I say to you, hey Jay, if we feel like this is a discussion that should continue, how about if we open up our calendars, figure out who else needs to be there, and really get into an in-depth conversation in our next meeting about what we're trying to accomplish, goals for the company, challenges with salespeople, and so on. But if we don't feel like there's a good fit, that's okay. You can just let me know, right? At this point, if Jay's response is, well, I wouldn't have the authority to book that sort of meeting, I'd have to go back to Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Bennett and ask them if that's something they'd like to do, red flag, right? We don't even have the authority to book the next meeting, right? Or sometimes what we'll hear is, well, this is preliminary. We're not looking to do anything until, second half of 2019. Right. And the beautiful thing is, how long did it take me to learn that? 2 minutes.
Yeah.
See, some people are going to the proposal stage with these people. This is how we shrink selling cycles, right?
Yeah.
So what we want to do is work with the best few, right? Not everybody that asks you for a quote is worthy of a quote, especially when quotes cost real money and take real time and multiple people to build. It's your job to figure out who's a good fit and who isn't.
Great. Kate, do we have anybody asking more questions from the audience?
No, Jay, why don't you go ahead and take it away? I know you have 2 more questions.
So let's talk about pipelines. How much quoted business should a seller have in their pipeline, and how should sales managers go about managing pipelines?
More. It's a difficult question to answer. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of question, but I think it's important. So pipeline, right? One of the things that I've found as a salesperson when I was very young in my 20s was that if my goal was 100,000 in revenue, that if I could get 100,000 into my pipeline, I thought, okay, I've got a chance. It didn't dawn on me until years later that I had no chance. Having your goal, in other words, 1x in your pipeline, you're hoping, right? And one of our Sandler rules is no quoting and hoping, right? So one of the things that salespeople try and do is just get quotes, right? If I can get quotes and my pipeline looks okay and I can survive my weekly one-on-one for another week and see if I can find something real. I've talked to a lot of sales managers about this, and I would say 3x, 4x, 5x is kind of the answers that I hear the most. In other words, whatever your goal is for a period of time, let's say for 90 days, you probably need to have at least 3 times that in your pipeline all the time, because what we're going to assume is that your closing ratio is about 1/3. 1/3 of the time when you present a proposal to a qualified prospect that will result in business in a short duration, right, in the next 30 days. So when I'm doing pipeline management, this was way before CRMs, when I first got into sales management, I just created a spreadsheet, and this spreadsheet simply allowed my reps to put accounts, and then going across the top, month, right? So, April, May, June, July, dollars, and then behind each of the accounts, I had another column, which was their percentage of confidence. This was kind of my innovation, or at least I thought it was back in the time. Every CRM has it these days. But what I did was I forced them to say, how confident are you that this dollar amount, you're saying $100,000 in April for this account, how confident are you that this business is going to close, not just close, but in April? Because it's really interesting. From a salesperson's perspective, I felt like, hey, you know what, it didn't close in April, but I'll get it in May, right? And then come the end of May, well, it didn't close in May, but I'll get it in June. Didn't make a difference to me. I remember getting kind of chewed out by one of my sales managers who said, Jeff, we're a publicly traded company, and when you tell me that you're 90% good to go, I'm taking $90,000 and I'm going to our CEO who's going to Wall Street and saying, we've got it, okay? And not at some undefined point in the future, in April. I got to tell you a story. So when I was first promoted into sales management, I was in Spokane at the CBS television station, and I was having a conversation with the head of the entire region out of Seattle. His name was Glenn, the big boss. And I went into a forecasting meeting, and this was during a political season where there was a ton of political money coming into the TV station. And he said, Jeff, what's your number? first week on the job. And I said, well, I think we might be able to hit 1.2x if everything goes well. We're probably good for X. On the low end, 0.75x, but you know, if we get some more of that presidential money, we could go 1.5x. He goes, what's your number? And I said, are you looking for the number that I know we can get, or are you looking for the number that I think we might be able to get to? And he said, I want the number you bet your mortgage on, because when you took this job, that's what you decided to do. I said, can I have a timeout for 15 minutes? And I literally ran back to my reps, and I called a powwow, and I said, I want your real numbers right now, right? Because I realized that they don't know how to forecast, and I had to teach them how to forecast. So the best sellers, I would say, are self-managed, and by that I mean they're self-motivated, they know what they're trying to accomplish, why it's important for them, and they're not lying in their forecast. Because the forecast eventually is going to prove to be true or false. So one of the things I had to learn to do was to come back to my reps and say, okay, what's your number for the month on the first of the month? Right? Okay, is that the take it to the bank number you're going to bet your mortgage on? I started using this language. Then I'd come back at the end of the month and say, here's what you forecasted. You forecasted X. You only did 0.75. I'd listen to the excuses. We go through the process again. Right after about 3 months, they got tired of giving me the excuses, and I said, can we really start working on accurate forecasts?
Got it. Great. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. Some companies might need to do more quotes in order to hit their goals, but others might need to do fewer quotes. Do you agree?
I do. I think that when people start using the Sandler selling system, one of the initial things that should happen is shorter selling cycles, fewer quotes, right? Higher closing percentage. The higher closing percentage initially isn't even because their skills have been improved. It's because they're not fooling themselves anymore with the junk in their pipeline, right? They're learning to create that ICP and to stick with their ICP, to disqualify the bad opportunities sooner and to spend more time with the better opportunities. So we should see fewer quotes and better closing ratios. However, over time, what will happen is as they become more proficient with all aspects of the Sandler selling system, as they get better at prospecting, as they get more efficient at not wasting their time with some of those other unqualified opportunities, that they will start to do more quotes than they had previously because they're simply more efficient. That's where they really start to see the benefits. But yeah, I would say that initially, fewer quotes is probably a good goal.
Okay, great. I'm sure that some of our listeners might be wondering if they have the right salespeople on their team in the first place. What would you say are some traits of high-performing salespeople?
There are so many. And, you know, I have some assessment tools that I use, the DISC and the Divine online assessments. If people are interested, they can learn about that on my website. The Divine assessment in particular is very predictive. It's empirical. It's benchmarking the test taker versus the highest performers in their field. So, for instance, outside sales. And so it's 33 behaviors that are necessary for success. And there are two that consistently tend to, two or three, that predict sales success better than the others. Ambition and drive, goal orientation, and control and close. So ambition and drive is just simply how badly do they want it. Goal orientation and ambition and drive are very closely linked together. So I always like to ask salespeople in the interview if they're outside salespeople. It doesn't hold quite as true for account managers, customer service people, but outside hunters, right? I like to ask them, what do you want? They go, what do you mean? I mean, what is your goal? What motivates you? You mean in business and life? Right. And I just want to see if they have an answer.
Right.
Because for some people, their goal is to get a job. And that is not a signal of somebody who has high ambition and drive. Now, the people with the highest ambition and drive and goal orientation, they can be a bear to manage. I mean, when they're above the 95th percentile, I know they can sell. The problem is, are they going to start fires and, you know, do all kinds of, I mean, they're hard to manage. And I might not be able to keep them for a year or two, but I know they can sell. Control and close is similar. Control and close is how assertive and persuasive are they? How capable are they of doing whatever it takes within ethical boundaries to get the deal done? So they know what they're after. They're not looking for pats on the back. They're not looking for just being busy. They have a heat sensing radar for money-making opportunities. Again, that can sometimes be problematic as a sales manager, but those are traits of high-performing sellers. Some other things that I've seen, salespeople who are willing and able to fight to access higher-level decision makers is another predictor of sales success. So particularly when we're selling enterprise products into large organizations, when the seller is content to enter the organization at the place that they're told to enter the organization by the organization, procurement, buying, mid-level management, that's a predictor of low to mediocre sales success. Whereas when somebody says, no, I need to speak to somebody who understands the pain, who understands the vision, who can tell me about the 5-year plan, right? I want to talk to that person and then build relationships down and around that person. That is a predictor of success in sales. The other thing that I'd say rather generically is that the best predictor of success is previous success, particularly previous success that looks a lot like what you want them to do in this job. So one of the things I work with owners and sales managers a lot on in my sales management program is defining the position, right? What are the traits? It's also called an ICP. It's an ideal candidate profile, right? So define the position and then start saying, what are the traits of the high performers in this position, right? If you've been doing it for a while, go back and identify the top 2 or 3 sellers you've ever had and start saying to yourself, what were the traits of these people? If it's an outside sales position, you'll find they're goal-oriented, they have ambition and drive, they have control and close, they access high-level decision makers, right? But, you know, if the position requires a lot of cold calling, for instance, I want to ask the candidate in the interview, tell me about the position that required the most cold calling in the past. And I don't want them saying to me, I believe in cold calling, it's important. Okay, tell me about a time. Tell me about which position required the most cold calling, or if it's negotiating, or if it's accessing CEOs, right? If that's critical for success, then we want to build our ideal candidate profile and ultimately our interview process around those traits.
Great, great. Are there any other questions from the folks in the audience?
I'll remind everybody, feel free to type in a question. We can address that here real quickly. Just give you a few minutes. Do you have any wrap-up thoughts there?
Well, certainly looking forward to doing the seminar with PNDC coming up here in June. You know, I'm excited to share more about the Sandler approach to sales in general and prospecting specifically. Prospecting is it's never fun. I mean, when I do my prospecting boot camps, I'll have people raise their hands and I'll say, how many of you love prospecting? There's always one guy, right? Okay, let's hear your story. But for the most part, we don't like prospecting. And David Sandler said, you don't have to like making cold calls, you just have to do them. It reminds me of a quote from 7 Habits. I know you're a Stephen Covey fan. Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits said that successful people are in the habit of doing things that unsuccessful people don't like to do. And he said, successful people don't like doing them either, but their disliking is subordinated to the strength of their purpose. I love that. So in other words, when you have a big goal, when you have a clear why, right? If you can answer the question why you're doing it, then you're more likely to do it. If your goal is to play Division I basketball, then you're going to get up earlier than everybody else, and lift weights and run and work on your vertical leaping ability and work on your free throws before and after. You're going to do the things that aren't mandatory because you have a burning desire. And the beautiful thing about sales is that most salespeople have no cap on their income. And so if they want to make more money, don't go ask your boss for a raise. Just figure out what you want to accomplish, dream big, and then develop a plan, the prospecting plan, the cookbook for being able to accomplish that.
I'm very excited about the boot camp coming up on June 19th. And Kate, would you like to give the audience a little bit more info about that?
Absolutely. Jeff Schneider has generously agreed to give PNDC a business development boot camp on prospecting on June 19th here, and we are taking registrations for it now. It will be an all-day program covering creating an ideal customer profile, developing the strategies and skills required to succeed at all of your prospecting activities, turning cold calls into warm calls and getting past gatekeepers, finding customers' pain and getting invited into their office, as well as many, many other details. Jeff has also generously discounted this valuable training over $200 for PNDC members. So I encourage people to register. We'll kind of do a deep dive on some of the things that we've started on today. I understand from a few of our audience members that they're having trouble downloading some of the documents. So just a note, we will make sure to send those out to everybody after this event. Really appreciate both your time here today. I will let people know that we do have a few upcoming PNDC events next week. If you're up in Puget Sound, we have a tour and networking lunch at Esterline Control and Communications on May 1st. Also a roundtable with U.S. Congressman Denny Heck on May 2nd. And then here in the Portland area, we'll have our government contracting conference on May 3rd, focusing on an opportunity to talk to and meet with some of the buyers from the Veterans Administration, Forest Service, state and local government, so a good opportunity there. In Horizon, a little further out here, we do have our Northwest Aerospace Defense Luncheon that will focus on capturing opportunities in the new defense budget on May 30th. Which will have some speakers from Boeing, some people out from D.C. talking about the new defense budget. And then, of course, as we mentioned, Jeff Schneider will be hosting the event on June 19th. Details on all this and many, many more events can be found on pndc.us. Great. Again, thank you both for joining us here today. This was very informative information and valuable food for thought for our members here. Appreciate all this, and thank you all of those for joining us here online. We will send a follow-up email with those documentation that was provided so that you can take advantage of that as well. Great. That concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.